I would like to introduce this, the second panel of today's conference. It's the panel on financing options for collaboration science industry. Because of my financial background, I thought that we have to look at the problem of, or the issue of science industry collaboration by the financial angle. You know, for things to happen, there's always somebody that has to put the skin on it. And we have here 3 examples of financing sources for science industry collaboration, for scientific entrepreneurial activity. And they are deliberately not the typical we would expect to see here in a conference in Lisbon, which could be, for example, the National Agency for Innovation or the National Science Foundation, who are playing a very important role here in funding this type of undertakings. So the idea was, I mean, these people were obviously invited to participate, but we thought that it would be interesting to give the chance to less usual speakers here in Lisbon. So we have Kim Kruilgaard, with whom the representation has been working very closely. He's representing the EIB group here in Lisbon, almost more than 1 year now, I think. And Kim is going to share also the view here with us, not just of the EIB, but of the EIF, because the European Investment Fund is an institution inside the EIB group, which is owned by the European Commission and the EIB. So Kim has an extensive experience in financing the corporate sector from this European angle, and also early stage investment, as he was in the EIF, detached from the EIB. He has exposure to different jurisdictions. He has been, and also cultural backgrounds in Portugal, in Denmark, in Germany. In the EIB, he has worked in also with the Baltic states and Poland and Denmark. So clearly well positioned to put the national context of Denmark and Portugal into perspective. I hope I didn't miss much. Then we have Carlos Alberto Silva, is a representative of Sonai Investment Management, which is a company inside Sonai Group. Everybody knows here in Portugal. They are perhaps the biggest, I don't know, the biggest retail company. You like to think, at least there must be some indicators where you are the biggest. But certainly a very large employer in Portugal, operating mainly in retail and telecommunications. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And Carlos is going to give us the perspective of a Portuguese private sector financier who is involved also in looking for startups, tech-based companies, which in general have a certain link with the core activities of the mother group. He's a person from INESC, which was mentioned this morning by the Ministry of Science. So he started his career in the university and Faculty of Oporto in scientific field, in the systems, IT systems. But then he also got some training in management and is currently working as executive board member of Sonai IM. Not just managing the portfolio of these venture-backed companies and these innovative startups in this area, but also responsible for the shared services, if I understand, of the group, and as a CFO. And he has been involved also in the M&As and including some big cases in Portugal, or at least NOS, it's quite a prominent one. Thomas Beer is coming from Innovations Funded in Denmark. So we're talking about public fund, but in a different country. So I think it would be most interesting for Portuguese audience here to see how things can be done differently when using state money with the same objectives, I think. And Thomas is head of communication of Innovations Fund, and he has been also working on analysis of the impact of public instruments and public support into innovation policies and creation of scientific-based companies, tech-based companies, but also in how public money is spent in solving grand societal changes. And I think Thomas will be able also to explain throughout his presentation that Innovations Fund, they have different lines of actions, instruments to solve different problems that come up with. So I think enough. I will perhaps start with Kim. I have a European bias, so Kim, the floor is yours. Well, you can make your presentation, or you can sit, or you're free.
It's just coming up, so let me then use the time already now to of course, thank very much the European Commission for organizing this excellent initiative, for taking the initiative to take people from my home country, Denmark, but it could also, of course, also be other people. By chance, this came to be Denmark because of the special country recommendations that we heard before. And to have this dialogue with the Portuguese environment, and I already now really took a lot of notes on what is coming out of this. So I'd like to congratulate really Katarina, who has been driving this very much, but of course also all the team from the Commission. Secondly, by chance I'm Danish indeed, but my role here is not to be Danish, but rather I'm the head of the EIB's and EIF's office in Lisbon. It's a privilege for me to live in Lisbon and in Portugal. Frankly, I used to live as a child in Portugal, and so it was always my dream to come here. And my objective here in Portugal is to promote as much of the offering of the EIB group as possible to Portuguese enterprises and of all sorts of stakeholders. And EIB is a very varied, widely spread institution. And now I'm representing European Investment Fund. And I'd like to make this presentation about, indeed, our activity in technology transfer. I'll make some general observations, but please bear in mind all the time that we are not a policy-making institution, of course. We have some observations I'll share with you, but our role is to build ecosystem. And we have now, since 17 years, in fact, in 2000 we were remodeled, and at the time I was in EIF. And we are about supporting the ecosystem, and EIF today is about 20–25% of the venture capital market of Europe, which in fact shows in one way a certain success, but on the other hand you can also argue a certain failure of the ecosystem to develop further. Let's go into it. EIF, we support small and medium-sized enterprises both through guarantees and through private equity. This is the basic message. And we do so throughout the whole lifetime of an enterprise. We do it through a fund-of-fund model. So we invest in funds, specialized investors that in turn invest in the enterprises. We do not invest directly. But we take a lot of risk in doing so, and we have over the years, with some 600 funds, developed, I would argue, a lot of expertise in selection of funds and selection of good targets, funds being not only the managers but also the underlying strategy, the market opportunity and so on. I'll revert to that. And we today cover all the areas from pre-seed all the way to development capital within the EIF. So we are co-financing with business angels, we are doing technology transfer, and we do also funds, and we invest in funds all the way through to essentially mid-market and late stage, take restructuring, M&A, etc. That's the EIF. And the EIB, and I don't have slides on this, but we can of course talk about it, as it was kindly mentioned before, the Science for You as one example. EIB then goes the next leg and bridges another valley of death, if you like, which is the one after venture capital and before full bankability, when EIB has a quasi-equity facility, and where we actually take equity and quasi-equity positions in companies which are not yet fully bankable or which are coming out of the venture capital world. This is about 600 to 700 million euro per year that we are financing into that market, and I'll gladly speak about that too. Now it's about, of course, university-industry collaboration. We can call it technology transfer. Just to summarize, it's been said much more elaborately before by the previous speakers. It's obviously about transforming the university knowledge into market applications on the way there. You have various models, spin-offs, licensing, collaboration, etc. And for universities, what are the objectives? It is, of course, to engage with industry and to develop partnerships. I think this is very important to go out from the inward to the outward looking, to help set research agendas, etc. I have been, of course, also following the Interface initiative here in Portugal. And this idea of setting research agendas and having industry-led research agendas is something that is also being implemented now in Portugal and has been done before. And I remember very well in 2000 when we had the Lisbon Agenda, and some of the objectives that we have today, if I may say, like the 3% research relative to GDP and 2/3, 1/3 private public, in a way that was established in the year 2000. And at the time we also had the technology platforms, and the technology platforms were indeed a huge and a great initiative, I thought, to have on a European level industry-led research agenda setting. But coming back to the micro level, if you like, it is an opportunity. Furthermore, is of course becoming active participants in TT-led vehicles, and there are various models for that I'll come back to in a moment. And then of course outsource some of the activity to qualified people. Now, there are some preconceptions about this. This slide shows some of them. It's still a matter of also bridging cultural gaps. So there are perceptions like that academia and the world of finance are different, and world of finance is a predator for academia, or that TT commercialization is not a main purpose of science, and so on. What I'd like to focus on here are, first of all, the long lead times. This is a fact. Long lead times in technology transfer, we after all, when we look at the cycles that I showed before, is really going from pre-seed and then one day, hopefully some of these initiative startups will have been going through all the chain up to sale exits in whichever way. And so you need very patient investors, and you need also very patient policymakers and very patient universities. And secondly, down to the left, value of investing in academia comes from privileged access. This is one of the issues that we like to look at a lot when we are taking the other side, which is venture capital funds approaching us and saying we would like to set up such a fund, and they always claim that they have privileged access to the universities. But how to establish that privileged access and make it really tangible and actual is one of the challenges that we see. Some observations, maybe. Again, I know we need to run for time, so maybe just a few key ones is that we have an EIF study completed. It's actually 2013. It's on our website about some lessons learned, and one of them is that it shows that actually TTO success is closely related to the size of universities. And so the bigger universities are having greater success because they have the critical mass and they have the potential to actually establish a bigger team, a diverse team with the right qualifications. And so of course teaming up is the answer for smaller universities and for countries which are more fragmented. Otherwise, I think this is really what I like to say on this slide. Therefore, considerations for academia when going into the sector, and again, remind you, we are not policymakers, we're just observing. is that you need to really, from the academia, senior support, you need to have a very clear vision and a long-term vision. It was also mentioned before by the previous panel. It has to go, of course, beyond the cycles of governments, that you implement a strategy that is reliable and is also reliable for the institutions that invest in the structures. Then, of course, staff. You need to recognize entrepreneurship with the university professors, and it has to become part of indeed the business model. The financing chain, one should have in mind, in respect to that is not enough to have a proof of concept program or a pre-seed fund. We often see still today that those funds are too small and they do not have the capacity to follow through, and there's no real strategy to what happens next. So essentially one has to be aware that it's not enough to make the initial investments, but rather one has to have an ecosystem, one has to have a strategy, one has to have the links in order to have a good chance of seeing these investments actually mature. And I already mentioned the importance of the investors being like-minded. This implies that you need, of course, close collaboration. You need, as an investor in such a fund, to have the access to the good finance. We are not into direct financing or research. We are financing companies. So essentially, that is also a bridge. I'll come back to that when we speak about proof of concept versus startup funds and our take. The governance, also important. Investors, third-party investors, private sector investors, we're very sensitive to conflicts of interest. We would like to see independent managers. Independent management of funds means that they are commercially minded investments, and investors in the funds do not mingle with investment decisions. So therefore, the management team should be independent. We need alignment of interest, so we need really to have investors that can focus in the long run. And last not least, minimum size of a fund. We see it to be minimum 30 million euro in order for such funds, even pre-seed and seed funds to be viable, to be able to pay the management fees, to be able to follow through in a reasonable way. And EIF can take up to 50% of such funds. So indeed, that is where EIF goes in and takes a risk, that we actually invest quite a lot of money in taking gambles, in some cases calculated gambles on new teams, new markets, and taking up to 50% of the funds. The funding gap that was mentioned before, essentially this market of early stage technology transfer is of course a typical case of market failure, if you like. I mean, at least you have very asymmetric distribution of information about on the underlying research, high transaction costs, high risks, and so it is quite natural that that many investors shy this sector and rather go for the more traditional late and mid-stage venture capital if one enters this area. So there is a gap to be bridged. We see, of course, an abundance of proof of concept programs. These are typically more grant-based, and then university-related seed and early stage funds. One builds on the other, of course. And we have a number of examples how to structure such funds, university-related funds. So we have seen and invested in everything from joint ventures to partnerships, independent managers who make a proposal for technology transfer fund. There's a case here in Portugal, in fact, that we are following very closely and hope to support in fundraising. There are co-investments along evergreen funds. So evergreen funds is essentially a revolving fund as opposed to the closed-end funds. There are models there too. And when EIF supports, well, this essentially summarizes how we do it. So we do both pre-seed but also later. We also do have pockets for proof of concept financing. So this is a question often answered or raised to us. We can also support funds that address partially 5 or 10% proof of concept investments as a feeder into the technology transfer fund, and I think this is an important aspect. Otherwise, up to 50 million euro, and how do we go about due diligence? An area we may want to talk about. What is the focus of EIF when investing? How do we go about actually approaching which are the funds we want to finance? And we do it in screenings. We have a very structured approach. And the initial question, of course, are the partner institutions. So what is actually the proposal on the table? Which is the technology transfer opportunity? Which are the partner institutions that are joining in? And very important, first question, potential investors. I like to raise this because I'm here in my capacity here in Lisbon, actually from time to time being approached by also funds that are looking at this market. And we have also experience with 2 concrete cases. And we have to make the candid question, well, do you have other major investors beyond potentially EIF? Because this market is difficult in general, and is, if I may say, even more difficult in Portugal to find private sector investors or market-based investors that can co-invest with EIF. EIF has a constraint of 50% as mentioned, and we would like to see the private investors all market-based. When I say all market-based, I like also to give that message across. It doesn't have to be private money, but it has to be market-based public money can also qualify. And EIF has launched a program, a facility of co-investment with national promotional institutions, where EIF is managing facilities jointly with these institutions, and they are co-funded. And in those cases, the objective of EIF is indeed to make these funds invest on a market-based term, and EIF can then go beyond, jointly with these funds, beyond the 50% to try to bridge another gap in the market, which is the gap of finding investors and actually making the funds happen. Okay, I'm late for time, Katarina, no? So, okay. Otherwise, important are also, of course, the market and the investment process and the investment strategy. The investment strategy needs to be very closely linked to the size of the fund and the opportunities that are seen. Whether it's a national fund or, say, an Iberian fund, depends on really whether there's a convincing argument that there's a genuine pipeline of transactions in the market that justify a fund. And of course, one always finds a small group of opportunities, but we know well, especially in the early stage, that it's really a matter of a very diversified approach to start with. And then you start seeing which are really the corns that show results and that you then focus in on. And so therefore, very important for these funds is that the investment strategy is linked to the market and to the size in order to get them off the ground. To finish off, normally when we do EIB presentations, we start with the amounts because we are in the billions and millions. Now I'm finishing. I apologize a bit for the slide because it's you shouldn't look from left to right, but from right to left. So we're on an upward trend. We have invested 170 million euro in this market. So basically, in technology transfer and business accelerators in the past year. So we are really open for business. We're also open for business in Portugal. That's the first message I would like to give. Secondly, I would like to give the message we are also supporting incubators and accelerators, as you can see in the slide. We are, through the EIB Institute, in fact, sponsoring and financing an incubator in Amarante, in northern Portugal. This is about social innovation and social enterprise financing, so startups in the social innovation area. But just to wrap that up. And thirdly, I'd like to underline that beyond this deep end equity venture capital area, we of course through the EIB and under the Juncker plan are also doing a lot of financing also in the quasi-equity space for companies that are then maturing up through these stages, and of course we're open to business also on that side. All right, thank you very much.
Good morning to you all. Thank you for the invitation. I think it's a very relevant point we are trying to address here. Closer, okay. And I'll speak also to this side because I was on the other side there in the morning and I couldn't hear. So the first question here is, who from you are from the industry? So next time, Katerina, we'll need a bigger room. Yeah, but still I'm making the point. I'm making the point. So whenever we talk about industry and universities, of course, we need to balance this a little bit more. Not saying that you are not representative, it's not true, but still we need to make this a little bit more representative. So before going into the points I'll try to raise here, I would like to present you a little bit Sona Investment Management, and that's important because it really allows me then to explain the main issues and challenges we have in relationship with universities and with the talent, more broadly speaking. So Sona Investment Management, we've launched this 2 years ago, just 2 years ago. And the reason for that is, on one side, we think we have, at the time we had the right set of competencies, so meaning that we've been launching tech companies since early 2000, through as part of basically spin-offs coming out of the main businesses, both retail and telecoms. And also throughout that period we've been acquiring companies because one of our approaches is buy and build, so acquiring companies to expand. So the companies that we already have, we acquired additional companies that we merge, and then either we expand geographically or in terms of portfolio, and that allows us also to grow the businesses way beyond Portugal. Because whenever we talk about tech and Sona Investment Management, I need to say this is a tech investor, so specifically investing in tech. We are talking about a global market, okay? So, but I was saying that we had the right, we think we had the right set of competencies, and as a group, if you think about it, our main sectors are retail and telecoms. So you don't see a lot of growth on those sectors. So it's in business terminology is what we call mature stage kind of businesses. And importantly as well, those businesses, so there's a strong digitalization trend happening as we speak, and we think it will get even stronger. And it's really important as an innovation source, if you want, to increase the exposure of these type of businesses to technology. And we think we cannot do it on our own, only with internal instruments. We think we really have a lot of gains by having close contact with everything that's happening in the tech world, related with our sectors, because there's a disruption potential around here. So those are the reasons. In terms of size, just to give you an idea, we will end 2018 with more or less 100 million of cash invested. Our portfolio is more or less valued north of 200 million. And that has to do with the fact that we've increased a lot our investment activity in the recent years. And I was having this discussion in the break. We are not a corporate venture, a typical one at least. It's true that we invest from our balance sheet, from the balance sheet of the group. We are not structured as a fund, but our goal is financial returns. So we don't invest with a strategic aim of bringing competencies into the group. It's not the case. The idea is to invest, to get financial returns, to get the better shareholding structure for the companies we invest in, and to help them to grow. Our key distinctive factor, so whenever we go and we compete for a certain asset, is the fact that we put over the table our expertise and also our assets. So what does that mean? That means that whenever I speak with a certain company addressing a certain issue, either in retail or telecoms, I have the expertise on my side to know what are my pain points, what are my needs. And when I say I mean I with the linkages I have within the group. And companies really value this input, because one of the main reasons companies fail is because they have a very good technology, but then they miss the market need. So there's no market need for that. So that's one point. And the other point, of course, is networking, and is the portfolio companies that we have are spread around the world. So that gives us a lot of potential for them to grow. And that's when we started, we were not sure that that value proposal would be as compelling as it is proving to be. We've announced recently an investment in a cybersecurity in the Silicon Valley, and the shareholding structure there is Lightspeed and Redpoint. So for the ones who are aware of that, those are the main VCs in the Silicon Valley area, and we are there with them, and we were the lead investors on that round. And that was precisely because they value what we know in terms of cybersecurity, and precisely because they value that we can help them expanding to Europe, because that's the point they are trying to address with this financing round. So that's why we see ourselves as an active investor. So we put the money, but it's not only that. It's we want to put in place initiatives. We want to help them to grow in the areas where we can, because we cannot help them on everything, and that's why these shareholding structures need to be diverse. So in terms of investment model and investment theme, so by now you already understood that we are very focused on areas we invest, and that means that we invest in software development, we invest in those sort of areas, artificial intelligence and blockchain and those things, but they need to be applied to either retail, telecoms, or cybersecurity. So that really, we are picky. That's the main point. And in terms of Portuguese scale, we don't get, most of our pipeline is not in Portugal. Of course, we would like it to be. Good news here is that in terms of investment model, we cover since early stage up to more mature stages. So 1.5 years ago, we've created Bright Pixel. It's an incubator. We call it Company Builder Studio. And the idea there is basically we have a team there, I don't know, 15, 20 people working on a daily basis with either retail guys, telco guys. And the idea there is to test new technologies. We have to say artificial intelligence, blockchains, all those things, but apply to business needs. And then with this sort of pipeline, the idea is to identify 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever use cases where we can invest as a pre-seed investor. And those guys, those 2 guys, will develop a prototype within Bright Pixel, within 12 months, something like that. And then hopefully they will have a product, and they will go after revenues, and they will go after additional investors to help them to scale the business. So that's how Bright Pixel is oriented. I said a little while ago that we are not structured as a fund. Actually, we've recently set up a small fund there, an 8 million fund with IFD. But again, that particular fund is limited to Portugal. On the other side, we also have, as I've said, stakes in companies, and they can be minority stakes, they can be majority stakes. Um, and there we help them to, as I've told you before, buy and build, so growing non-organically, or as an active investor at the board level, we help them also to grow. And so in the end, our activity boils down to two main areas. So one is portfolio development, so going after investment opportunities to invest. And on the other side is what we call portfolio management, so putting in place our value proposal whenever we are present in a certain company. And if you think about it, our raw material is talent. Either talent to invest in, so people with ideas, entrepreneurs, that we of course will open the doors of Bright Pixel for them if the idea is really compelling and if we see value in the team. And on the other side, on the companies we have, we need talent to recruit. So talent to invest. There's a positive note, a very positive note here, which is in Portugal we have very, very good engineers, mathematicians, people that speak very well English, French, whatever. And that puts us in a position, in a privileged position, I would say, to invest and to make things that scale, that go and grab value around the world. And the evidence of that is that you have Fidzai, you have OutSystems, you have Farfetch. So things, in our opinion, are getting better on that front. So we see more talent, but specifically people more willing to do things and to scale. That's the good news. The less positive note is the fact that it is scarce. There's not a lot of talent in Portugal to invest in. I was sharing that in the break as well, that we set a target each year to invest. So our mandate is to invest 40 million a year. For early stage, we dedicate more or less 3-4. And unfortunately, we will not meet the target this year. And we are also looking at abroad, so it's not only a problem in Portugal. The talent to recruit is another thing, but also very, very important for us, which is there are sectors, so we are in retail, telecom, always tech, and cybersecurity. There are no cybersecurity experts in Portugal, as simple as that. There's a huge market out there, areas growing like 15-20%. My dream is to set up a cybersecurity competence center in Portugal, but I can't because there are no cybersecurity engineers in Portugal. There are no hackers, so it seems that we are very, very, very clean. But if you talk about artificial intelligence, if you talk about software development in general, it's the same thing, and things are getting worse. So you see Farfetch announcing that needs, I don't know how many 100 engineers. You see Fidzai, OutSystems, ourselves, we are struggling for talent. So the talent will get more scarce, it will be more expensive, and this is a call for action here for universities. So please do. You have a very, very good, very high standards in terms of quality, producing engineers, but unfortunately the number is not enough. So if you see this as a factory, the raw material is getting scarce. So we need to work on that a lot more. The other point I would like here to share with you is the point related with incentives and with the relationship between universities. So, bearing in mind that talent is very scarce, it means that, and bearing also in mind that universities they have a lot of talent there, they have the teachers, they are training people. Our view is that the relationship between universities and the industry needs to be reinforced. There are some practical problems. I will share just the practical problems and concerning about long-term policies for another session. But just to give you two examples, one practical problem is we are more active now on our side, approaching universities and trying to establish partnerships for joint proposals to submit projects and things like that, very aligned with the roadmap of the companies we have. But there's, for example, a different perspective of the dimension time. So we are very pressured for a thing called time to market. So we need to develop fast and we need to address the market need as fast as possible. And universities tend to lag a little bit on this interaction. So that's one. The other one is for example, and we are talking about software development, is how things are managed in terms of IP rights. So we need to be more flexible on probably on both sides to make things move faster. Because as I've told you, and I stress this point again, we need to cooperate more. The other point I would, and again, practical point I would like to make is related with the incentives and how institutions like European Investment Bank can help and are helping. For us, we are a different kind of animal. So by now you already understood that. But the way we see the ecosystem is there are 2-3 main comments I would like to make. So one is the incentives need to be balanced across the life cycle of the company. So since early stage up to the scale phase. And that's very important. Otherwise, if you, for example, put a lot of incentives in the early stage, you will end up, and then you miss the next step, we will end up with a failure rate of 99%, which is typical from these sectors, but we could change, we should commit ourselves to change that a little bit better. The other point is we are competing globally. And we think our vision is that this is not only about money, because we all hear that there's a lot of liquidity in the system. It's about smart money. So the incentives should be put in the hands of people, teams that have strong track records and that can help on the companies. Be it on the networking, be it accessing customers, be it product development. One gap that we have in Portugal, for example, is it's true we have very good engineers, but we don't have as a country strong competencies in product development or scaling companies. That's something that we lack. So whenever we give that step, typically we need to go after someone from the US or whatever to help the company do that. And the other point I was trying to make is we are not, as a group and by tradition, we don't go a lot after public incentives. And the reason for that is because there's typically a mismatch between our goal and the purpose of the incentives. That typically happens. And in particular, the point I would like to make here is that we need to think at a European scale. Its incentives for Portugal have a lot of restrictions, and we have a fund like that. Of course, we will try to deploy the capital, but we would like it to be much more flexible in terms of footprint. And institutions like the European Investment Bank, of course, need to think at a European scale, at least. It's a global scale, actually. But for a country like Portugal, this is really, really key. Okay? That was it. Thank you.
Basically, Innovation Fund Denmark is been put into place for 3.5 years ago. It's about, you can call it pre-seed capital, public money. So there'll be no equity, there'll be no kickback, there'll be no ownership. And then you might ask, okay, why then spend public money? Dominic talked about funding cooperative research. So this is basically what we're talking about. And hopefully when I finish, you will see why there is a greater purpose in spending public money on this type of ventures. Basically, I've just put 4 small images on my welcome slide. There'll be Maersk, sailing the world's biggest container ship company. It'll be Novo Nordisk, the world's largest insulin company. This will be their headquarters in Portugal. You have Vestas, actually recruiting people in Portugal, Porto. For there's the world's largest wind turbine company. Then you have Lego, which those of you who have kids probably will know. So actually, there was just also to stress the point that José made about attracting multinational companies is very important because basically what we have been doing on our side is the fact that some of our investments has actually brought companies like Agilent, Wisebry, Beijing Genomic Institute to Denmark to put up special units because they've been taking part in Danish science projects. So I would say that science is a very, very great engine in terms of attracting companies to a country. We have in Innovation Fund Denmark, we have an active portfolio of 1.2 billion euro. This is divided in terms of 1,800 active projects. Also, we have 250 international projects. Next year, we'll be investing, and I stress the word investing. We'll be investing 200 million euro next year. Investing is because we want to stress the fact that this is not free money. This is not soft money. This is money that comes with a price in terms of that every money spent should be valuable for society. So we need to make sure that everything we do is coming back to the Danish taxpayers in terms of growth and employment. We only have 3 entries, and Katarina asked me whether I would go into depth with what we are providing, but I won't today because the time will be too short. But basically there was only 3 touch points. We started out having 14. We inherited 14 entrants, but right now it's only 3. It's for talents, it's for smaller sized, medium-sized companies, and then it's grand solutions, which will be the great scientific projects. What we've been doing for the last years is it's very important that we're not trying to make universities act as companies. We're not trying to make companies act as universities. But we are trying to make universities more keen on cooperating with companies. And we are trying to make companies more keen on spending time on what is happening at university side. And José told about the hostility he met when he left university and went to a company. In Denmark, he would be the greatest hero of all times, doing exactly that. So that's something for me very special, the fact that you come being a professor, starting out a company, employing people that you can, I can't imagine why would anyone be hostile to that kind of entrepreneurship. That wouldn't happen in Denmark. So basically trying to link these worlds, trying to make sure that the great science that has been made on university side also comes out to create value in society. So basically everything we do, we start out with excellence. We will only deal with the fact that this needs to be on a very, very high level in terms of science and innovation. There needs to be a clear value creation. There needs to be something in it for society. And the society needs to be ready to actually come around with this time of enterprise. So if everything is okay, then the project will start. Now I'll come with some insights about what we have experienced for the last years in terms of what is kind of the key success factors to do public-private partnerships. It's not rocket science, but it's very important. The first one is the fact that when you bring universities and companies together, they have different approaches, they have different cultures, and they have different goals. So if you start out a project and saying, okay, we'll do this together, you need to be perfectly sure that whatever the university provides is attractive for the company, and whatever the company brings in is attractive for the universities. So you need to be very, very sure that you do not make corporations that are good for the university to do science and are good for the company to do business, because then you're wasting your time. So we are spending an enormous time of energy making sure that everything we do is connected to the fact that these people really want to work together. So they basically need each other. We started out having a project where it took 6 months before they actually started. And it turned out the fact that it was because both the university side and the company side thought it was very nice to have some money that they could spend later on, meaning that they didn't really care about this project. And that must never happen. So a lot of time spent on this one. Also the fact that everybody provides their share, because sometimes there's a tendency to do public-private partnerships with many partners because it sounds good. But if you bring people along that really doesn't contribute, you can be pretty sure that the end result will be extremely poor. So making sure that every team member is knowing what to do. Open collaboration is something we talk a lot about, but it is extremely important. So if there are partners that are not willing to share the results they're gaining in a project, they shouldn't be in it, because they will kill the project before it's finished. Very much to focus on the fact on people, process and knowledge, because when we have public-private partnerships, one thing to remember is the fact that there are no leader in terms of a traditional leader that can hire and fire and change resources, because it's kind of a virtual company that you're creating. So dedicated leadership, the fact that there are people every time that are the best capable of both understanding the science but as well as understanding what's happening at the company side, is extremely important. So this is kind of from a project view when we start out a project. Then basically there needs to be risk capital, and there needs to be different kinds of risk capital. When Carlos and others, Kim, approaching it from a venture world, this will be the fact, okay, is this beneficial? Will we get our money back in 2 or 3-fold? But there also needs to be risk capital for those ideas that are not ready for the market yet, that haven't matured enough to make the market interesting, because this will be the incubation leading to the possibilities for venture capitalists to come into place. Fail fast, making sure that, for example, in EU, you have the framework very often, the fact that when you start out a project, you promise how to do the project. But what will, when 3 months later, you find out that the idea you had was rubbish, but you come up with a better one. What do you then do? In an EU framework, you will have to stick very often to the fact that you promised the Commission to do this thing. You might know that you won't succeed, but you've promised it, and that this is the key point. But that is not really useful if everyone in the team wants to do something else. So fail fast. And in our system, that means that people will come to us and say, okay, we promised you this, we can't deliver, we've come up with a better idea, would you want to hear it? We say yes. If it's a great idea, then we have another project. And that can happen, and it can happen several times. We have had projects starting out with something you wouldn't see the resemblance between what they ended up with and what they started with. But as long as it's a success, we're happy. We've been talking a little bit about quick settlement of IP rights and negotiation agreements and so on. One thing we did was at one point we were having very long sequences of negotiations with IP rights in every single project, and then our chairman just suddenly said, okay, why don't we just say 90 days? So we say yes to the project, and 90 days later all contracts are signed and we're ready to go. And then there was a lot of people say, it can't be done because that's impossible. And he said, okay, why? We haven't tried it. So it was put into place 90 days, and it works perfectly well. Actually, today we get our contracts done in much less than 90 days. So no need to do very long periods of this one. when investing public money, it's very important that the public investor actually takes a active role in the project, meaning that we are as keen as the project themselves on the fact that this needs to be a success. So we will be taking part in the steering group committees. We will be taking part in all the talks. We won't be taking the active decisions of what to do in the project. That will be the partners themselves. But we will be very, very close to the project. Also the fact that when the project then, if it's going to fail, we can then stop our involvement. So in every contract we do, if the project somehow is on their way to fail, then we just simply stop the project. There's no need to have a project that won't be a success anyway. And then we're perfectly aware of the fact that the future will pick the winners. So if you take our portfolio, you will find that many of our projects won't succeed. But luckily, we have successes to show the fact that the great stories they will pay for the whole thing. Just 2 examples of projects. I could have chosen several, but I've just chosen 2. GomSpace is actually grumpy old men, and I don't know if anyone of you know grumpy old men, but that will be a Muppet Show. That will be the 2 guys sitting at the balcony. These were 3 students actually. They were joked about at the university that these were the grumpy old men. They had money because the basic idea they had was to build a nanosatellite, a satellite this size. They would put it into space, and then they were to compete with the geostationary satellites that cost billions of dollars. But who would like to pay for 3 students wanting to put out a nanosatellite in the space somewhere in Ukraine? This is where the Innovation Fund came into place, because they did a cooperation with Aalborg University. They put out a very, very good project. They actually managed to get the satellite up. It was lucky because the next time they sent a satellite, the rocket was blown away. But luckily the first time was a success. The results have been a success. They're now so successful that in northern part of Denmark, they're recruiting so many engineers that the other companies in northern Jutland are complaining because they can't get the talents, because these guys are taking them all. So it's high risk, but it is also high gain when it's succeeding. This is another example. This is coming from our hospitals. It might be different in Portugal, it might be the same. But basically, they were looking upon the fact that when you have the hospital staff in Denmark, the situation would be that you wouldn't have a smartphone. You have your own ordinary phone. You'll be called, and you'll be asked to take a bed or another medical instrument to a room in another place of the hospitals. When you had the order of delivering this bed, nobody would know where you were at the hospital. So you could be very close, but you could also be on the very far side of the hospital. Very often, 2 out of 3 times you would misunderstand your order. So you would definitely not know where you find the bed, and you wouldn't know where to deliver it. People looking at it say, okay, this is a mess, and this is misuse of everybody's time. The project were to do it in a ordinary fashion with modern ICT technology. Today, these people, they walk 40% less during a day, and they achieve many times more, and you don't have all those communication mistakes any longer. Also, the company that was involved is now exporting these solutions to other countries. So you have, in a Danish hospital, more effective solutions benefiting patients, but you also have a company that is today exporting these kind of technologies to other places where they had the same troubles as we had. Something we do or try to do is the fact that we would like to show some what is the impact, good or bad, of the investments we do. This is a new impact assessment we just made on MADE, which is a production platform. It's involving 30 Danish companies, the 5 largest universities, going together to make sure that our production technology is being put onto a higher level so that we can maintain and hopefully also improve our production in Denmark. They've been working for 2.5 years. They are a little lower than half through the project. But what we could see is the fact that a lot of the technology was already implemented at the company sites. So we were doing an interview, just finding out how much of this science had actually been put into place and into practical use in companies, and had actually had that we have had a productivity increase. Basically, it showed the fact that this public money today already during the project, the companies have put new technology into place that is on a higher level than the public investment was in the first place. They also say, okay, we are on our way to implement the technologies in other parts of the companies. These will be the largest Danish companies. So if they have done a production line here that is new, they have estimated where can we use this production line in other parts of the company. It will be a higher amount. We also estimated the fact that if all the MADE participants are to be using the same technology as some of their MADE co-members have done, there will be an even higher return on investment. And then lastly, which is obviously wishful thinking, but the fact that if all the Danish companies were to use the same production lines as these people have done, this will be the benefit for society. And then we are out in €1 billion. So this is basically what we are trying to do, is trying to incubate new development in Denmark that hopefully in a year's time will show to be very beneficial for the Danish society. Yeah, I will skip this one. Okay, now I'll just do a few things at the end, just to make a change. This is a question: does Danes book most Airbnb or hotel rooms? I haven't got the figures for Portugal, but you don't have to answer. But probably many of you will think, okay, still hotel rooms must be bigger than Airbnb in Denmark. No, it's not. The Danes rent more homes through Airbnb than Swedes and Norwegians together. We just doubled the amount of rents. So, Carlos, other people were talking about disruption. Yes, it is indeed happening, and it's happening really, really fast. Talking about disruption, when we talk about exponential growth, which is happening in many instances in the Danish business environment, you have Moore's law. Many of you know it, about computer chips doubling their capacity every year and a half. So what is exponential growth is actually, this is a stadium from Russia, the 4,000 kilometers from here. Hopefully you'll be playing World Cup against us at this stadium when it's finished. So imagine that I will be standing in the middle of this stadium, and you'll be sitting up here. It will be waterproofed, so it will be built. They will be finishing the building. After 1 minute, I will put a drop of water on the circle in the middle. After 2 minutes, I will put 2 drops of water. After 3 minutes, 4 drops of water. 4 minutes, it will be 8 drops of water, and then 16 and 32 and so on. Imagine how long will it take for you to get wet? Take a long time? No? It will take 48 minutes. You will know what is happening around the end of first half. This is exponential growth, and this is happening in many areas, meaning that when you talk about business, you need to be extremely careful for the fact that things are much more shaky that they used to be, and there's a lot of opportunities going into this sector, but there is obviously also a lot of dangers for the companies that have been put into place for many years. When I showed the 4 Danish companies, 3 of them are around a century old. And I can tell you that these companies are extremely afraid of being disrupted. For example, Maersk with the container ship companies, they're saying it obviously, okay, there might come someone and say that the way we do shipping is not the best way to do it. So there might come a business model that is better than ours. So definitely for them, it's the future is very exciting. This is just to show the fact that it's not just today that things are going fast. This is New York in the 1900, and if you're very good, you can spot a car with horses. This is Fifth Avenue, the same road, 1913. And if you're very, very good, you can spot the horse. So this was in 13 years. So when we're talking about disruption, new technology today, this was also present previously, but now it's happening with a speed that is hard to imagine. Then I would just say at the end that doing what we do in Denmark is not just about the money, because basically what we're trying to do is just we're trying to use the money as a instrument of promoting public-private partnerships. So we will, for example, we will send our project leaders to Harvard Business School on a trip where they will be engaged with negotiations, with IP rights, with strategy, and all sorts of things to make them be better project leaders. We will have a lot of talks in Denmark trying to promote what we're talking about. We will have young people sent abroad. This is Silicon Valley to know what it's really about when they want to go out on the big scene. So basically, there is much more to this than just the fact that we have the projects. And then this is, you can't read this, and it's Danish, so I'm sorry. But it's just for the fun of it. This is, I am head of communication, so that is one of my tasks. But whenever you want to promote the fact that you spend your money in a good sense, you can do impact analysis, like the one with MAID. But sometimes you also need to give some concrete examples of projects that have delivered something that we can all attract to immediately. So this time I think we have like 50 of these now. We're showing them to politicians, we're showing them to universities, showing universities those where they are taking part themselves. But these are actually real examples of science that has been put into place and now creates value in society. So you have the gum space here. Hopefully you'll be drinking Carlsberg. If you know Carlsberg, you'll be drinking it from a paper-made bottle in the future. There is examples of where you have changed the way you construct roads so that you spend less gasoline on driving on these roads, and there are several. So that is another thing, very important always to show the concrete results. Yeah. So that will be my words.
Well, since we are very, very close to lunchtime and somehow behind the schedule, what I would suggest is that I would give the opportunity for the audience to engage with the participants. The questions I had for them, I can make them later. But just wanted to draw a few common thread in all these presentations, which struck me particularly. So there might be some areas where there's a lack of risk financing, but in general, all these collaborations between university, research organizations, and in the industry, there seems to be funds available, at least to the most parts of the value chain or the financing cycle of these undertakings. But a common problem seems to be talent. You know, we see that there is a fight for talent, so it's not just enough to have the funds, but you need to really talented and motivated people willing to do things to use the funds that are available. And also this important idea of teaming up together to share the risks. And I think here it's interesting to have the views of the EIB and all the other members of the panel. So floor is open. Could you please identify yourself by saying your name and the organization?
Thank you. So my name is Gonçalo Amorim. I run one of the leading technology-based accelerators in Portugal called Building Global Innovators. We're part of MIT Portugal program, and this is very relevant for us because we've been trying to transfer knowledge from industry and academia together both ways. So my question goes probably to the, let's say, the international members in the panel, that based on what you heard so far, what do you think should be our bet? More multinationals or more bet on talent? Or what's the model that you would recommend from the information you've got, which is very limited, I guess?
Yeah, well, one very important thing we talked about in the break, some people about the fact that in Portugal, many of the company leaders are not by necessarily coming from university side, so they have another background. So you might have something there that needs to be clinched. One thing we have in Denmark that could be of interest is the fact that we have industrial PhDs, which will be the PhD you know, but that will be a PhD that will work part-time at university side, part-time at company side. And these have been extremely good in Denmark in terms of letting the industry know what is happening at university side and vice versa. So I would say that making sure that you get as many talented PhDs out in the private sector would be one way of also attracting and making it even career-wise even more attractive to be a PhD. So that could be one of the places where you could start with improving your talent.
I think I already hinted a bit at it when I was making the presentation, which and also my question to the previous panel. Has somebody said, okay, you have what you got and you need to build on what you got? So in Portugal you do have traditional industries, and you have probably beyond the issue of reaching later stage technology, applying and deploying the PhDs and so forth, which may not in its own be an objective, but the objective of, I presume, is also the traditional industries and the challenge of digitalization, and the challenge to the business models of these traditional industries in making the transition. It seems to me to be a daunting challenge in general, but it's very much in Portugal a big challenge. And so therefore, my take from what I see in Portugal with only 1 year now here, but is that these initiatives now, the cluster-based initiatives, which team up these fragmented, relatively small companies, is one way to go forward, I presume. And then secondly, I think teaming up internationally with know-how on issues like how to build up digital innovation hubs, for example, to just stay with that area, can have a lot of benefit. You know, basically sharing and seeing what other similar areas and similar issues, how they've been addressed. And then the other area is, of course, the debate which is ongoing, which is what is best, building a local venture capital ecosystem or importing venture capital from outside. How to go about this. And you had a debate in Portugal, I know, between whether you use the 200 million funds for co-investment or for fund-to-fund or somewhere in between. And there, as I said, market-based approach in the medium long term is at least an approach that EIF has been using, and if I may say now been used to such an extent that EIF is now attracting private money that is investing in EIF for EIF to invest. And of course that is then maybe the medium long term sustainable way.
There's time for maybe 1 or 2 questions.
Hi, good morning. My name is Marta Cerejo. I'm from the TTO of the Faculty of Science of Nova University. I have here one question. You are speaking about talent, and me as a TTO, I work every day with talented, very talented researchers. So what I would like to ask you is it really an issue of lack of talent, or is a lack of knowledge on the market need of the ideas, and how universities can assess that market need if the industry is not present and it's not here to speak with us and tell us what they need. Even when we speak on the fact that industry does not absorb our PhDs, are we delivering the PhDs that the industry needs?
I think it will be interesting to have the two national perspectives.
Do you want to go first? Okay, so the lack of talent that I mentioned is a fact. So meaning that whenever we try to hire people with a certain job description, and typically we are talking about very skilled technical people, we don't get them. That's as simple as that. And that's a problem that we don't see just in Portugal, because we have a global footprint and we feel it. And it's not only us. There's an interesting data point if you want. There was this transaction, I don't know, a month ago or something like that. And there is a metrics in the industry called multiples. So whenever we do a transaction, we pay a certain amount, and then there's a multiple saying, well, the value over revenues was 5 times or whatever. Now the multiple in certain sectors, and this particular sector is artificial intelligence, which might be a bit of an extreme case, but the multiple was 2.5 million per employee. And that's a fact, so meaning that there's a scarce talent in certain areas, and companies like Google's, Facebook's, whatever, are willing to pay huge amounts of money for that. So point number one. Point number two, I'm not saying that so I stressed throughout my presentation that we need to improve our relationship, and probably starting with ourselves at the industry side. So on my side, I'm trying to put people speaking with universities and trying to understand their views as well, their drivers, their perspectives, because in the end we need to communicate a lot better to understand each other's needs and hopefully find some common background in order to, because I feel there's a misalignment between what we are producing, because universities are factories of talent, our perspective, and between the market needs. So, and it's an interesting game, because 3 years ago we were talking about big data, last year about artificial intelligence, this year about blockchain. Next year you can put a bet, but I don't know. So it's evolving. It's a continuous movement. So hopefully I, more or less. Okay, so in the break we can.
So let's conclude this panel, and let's go for lunch, everybody.
Thank you.
Não vão estar mais algum tempo.